Maybe if the FBI spent less time investigating progressive women of color and more time investigating actual domestic terrorists, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's voice cut through the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room like a serrated knife. She was leaning forward in the witness chair, one finger jabbing toward the man seated 4 chairs down from Chairman Grassley. FBI Director Kash Patel sat motionless, a yellow legal pad in front of him, his pen resting beside a thick manila folder. You know what the problem is, AOC continued, not waiting for an answer. The FBI has been weaponized. COINTLPRO, Martin Luther King, Muslim surveillance, Black Lives Matter. And now she paused for emphasis, her voice rising. Members of Congress who dare to tell the truth about January 6th. Several Democratic senators nodded. The progressive media section in the gallery sat forward, phones already recording. I was hunted that day, Director Patel. Hunted. I hid in my office thinking I was going to die while your agency did nothing to stop it. And then instead of investigating the insurrectionists who wanted me dead, you investigate me. You question my staff. You subpoena my donors. She sat back, arms crossed, chin up. The hypocrisy is absolutely breathtaking. Chairman Grassley cleared his throat. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. I'm not finished, Mr. Chairman. AOC didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on Patel. Director, I want to know how many FBI agents are assigned to monitoring my social media versus monitoring Proud Boys forums. How many hours has your agency spent investigating me versus investigating white supremacist militias? Patel looked up from his legal pad. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, would you like me to answer those questions? Oh, please. She waved her hand dismissively. Let me guess. You're going to hide behind ongoing investigations or classified information. That's what you people always do when you don't want accountability. Actually, ma'am, I was going to answer directly. I just wanted to make sure you were finished. AOC's eyes flashed. I'm finished when I say I'm finished, Director. You work for the American people, you work for me. So yes, answer the question. Justify your agency's targeting of progressives. Patel set down his pen. The room had gone very quiet. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, according to FBI records, we have never opened an investigation into you personally, never questioned your staff, never subpoenaed your donors. So when you say we're targeting you, which specific FBI investigation are you referring to? AOC blinked. You're playing semantic games. I'm asking for facts. Patel's tone remained even. You made a serious allegation under oath about FBI misconduct. I'm simply asking you to support that allegation with evidence. The House Ethics Committee is not the FBI, ma'am. The progressive staffers stopped typing. Even the friendly senators looked uncomfortable. Patel picked up the manila folder. But since you're here, and since you've questioned the Bureau's credibility, its ethics, its priorities, I hope you won't mind if I ask you a few questions about your own record. AOC's jaw tightened. This is inappropriate. You opened this door, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You came to this hearing to question whether the FBI has the moral authority to investigate anyone. You've questioned our credibility, our fairness, our integrity. He opened the folder. Documents, photographs, spreadsheets. So I'm going to ask you about your credibility, your fairness, your integrity, and everything I'm going to ask is public record. Your own words, your own actions, your own ethics violations. He looked directly at her. Let's start with the Met Gala. AOC's face went pale. Senator Kennedy leaned into his microphone, a small smile playing at his lips. Oh, this is going to be good. Patel pulled out the first document. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, on September 13, 2021, you attended the Met Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Is that correct? I attended to make a political statement. That's not what I asked. Did you attend? Yes or no? A long pause. Yes. And you wore a custom-designed dress by Aurora James with the words "Tax the Rich" on it, correct? Yes. To highlight just yes or no, please. Patel's voice remained polite but firm. You wore that dress. Yes. And the ticket to attend this event, the Met Gala, costs approximately $35,000 per person. Were you aware of that? AOC shifted in her seat. I was invited as a guest. Were you aware that tickets cost $35,000? Yes. Patel nodded slowly, making notes. So you attended an event that costs more than most Americans make in a year, wearing a custom-designed dress to lecture people about inequality. That was the point, to infiltrate spaces of wealth. Infiltrate. Patel repeated the word. By accepting their invitation, by wearing their designer dress, by attending their party, that's infiltration. The room was silent. AOC's hands gripped the edge of the table. And you brought your boyfriend, now fiancé, Riley Roberts. Is that correct? He was my plus one. So 2 tickets at $35,000 each. That's $70,000 total. Who paid for those tickets, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? I didn't pay. The tickets were provided. Provided by whom? AOC looked at her lawyer. The lawyer whispered something. She turned back to Patel. The Metropolitan Museum provided them. So you accepted $70,000 worth of tickets as a gift from an institution that regularly lobbies Congress. Is that correct? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Patel leaned forward. Because the House Ethics Committee spent 3.5 years investigating this. They reviewed 12,000 pages of documents and they concluded that you impermissibly accepted gifts in violation of House rules and federal law. Were they wrong? The room was absolutely silent. AOC opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I paid for everything eventually. Eventually. Patel picked up another document. Let's talk about that timing, because according to the Ethics Committee report, you received professional hairstyling, makeup services, accessories, jewelry, and a custom dress. The total fair market value was estimated at over $40,000. Is that correct? I don't know the exact, the Ethics Committee does. $40,000 in services and goods. And when did you pay for them? AOC's hands gripped the edge of the witness table. I paid. You paid after the investigation started, didn't you? After vendors threatened legal action for non-payment. After the Office of Congressional Ethics referred the matter for investigation. That's when you finally paid, correct? I was always planning to pay. Then why didn't you? Patel's voice cut through her excuse. You attended the gala in September 2021. The investigation started in February 2022. 5 months later, you still hadn't paid. Why? AOC looked at the Democratic senators. None of them met her eyes. There were delays in calculating fair market value. You're a member of Congress, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You make $174,000 a year. That puts you in the top 10% of American earners. Are you telling this committee you couldn't afford to pay $40,000 for 5 months? It wasn't about affording. Then what was it about? Patel pulled out a photograph. AOC at the Met Gala, posing in her dress, surrounded by celebrities and billionaires. Was it about getting to hobnob with Anna Wintour and the ultra-wealthy while wearing a dress that mocked them, knowing you'd gotten it all for free? That's not, because that's what it looks like from here. Patel set the photo down. It looks like you lecture working families about paying their fair share, about how the rich are greedy, about inequality. But when you get the chance to attend a $35,000 per ticket party, wear designer clothes for free and rub elbows with billionaires, suddenly all those principles disappear. AOC's face flushed red. You're twisting. I'm reading from the Ethics Committee report, ma'am. Written by your Democratic colleagues. Not by Republicans. Not by the FBI. By Democrats on the House Ethics Committee who reviewed 12,000 pages of evidence and concluded you violated House rules. He flipped to another page. In fact, even after you finally paid after getting caught, the committee determined you still owed an additional $3,000 to properly reimburse at fair market value. Did you pay that? Silence. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, did you pay the additional $3,000 the Ethics Committee said you owed? Her lawyer leaned in, whispered urgently. AOC's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm working with the committee to resolve, so that's a no. Patel made a note. So 2 years after attending the Met Gala, after a 3-year investigation, after being found in violation of House ethics rules, you still haven't fully paid for the gifts you improperly accepted. He looked up at her. And you came here today to lecture the FBI about ethics and integrity. Is that right? The room erupted. Chairman Grassley's gavel came down hard. Once, twice, 3 times. Order, we will have order. AOC was on her feet. This is character assassination. This is your ethics record, ma'am. Patel remained seated, calm, and I have more questions. He pulled out another document. Let's talk about your designer for that dress, Aurora James. You know her well, correct? She's a friend. And did you know that her company, Brother Veli's, owed over $170,000 in unpaid taxes at the time she designed your dress? AOC blinked. I don't know about her personal, it's not personal, it's public record. Her company had outstanding tax liens, but there you were wearing a dress that said tax the rich, designed by someone who wasn't paying their own taxes. The irony didn't strike you. Patel pulled out another photo, a close-up of AOC's accessories at the Met Gala. And these accessories, the bag, the jewelry, who provided those? They were borrowed. Borrowed from whom? At what cost? Did you report them as gifts? AOC's lawyer was frantically taking notes. I believe they were properly reported. You believe? Patel's eyebrows raised. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, the Ethics Committee found that you failed to properly account for numerous items, that you underestimated fair market value, that your staff provided inadequate oversight. These aren't beliefs. These are facts. He leaned back in his chair. But here's what really interests me. The Ethics Committee said, and I'm quoting directly, "Forbearance may itself constitute a gift." Do you know what that means? AOC said nothing. It means that when vendors allowed you to delay payment for months, that delay itself was a gift. You were getting an interest-free loan of $40,000 from people who wanted access to a member of Congress. That's the definition of corruption, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I reject that characterization. You can reject it all you want. The Ethics Committee made that finding. Your own party's ethics investigators. Patel gathered the Met Gala documents and set them aside. He pulled out a new folder. But you're right about one thing. Let's move on. Let's talk about your economic policies. AOC straightened slightly. This was her territory. I'd be happy to discuss. Let's talk about Amazon. Her face fell. In 2018, Amazon selected New York City as one of 2 locations for its new headquarters. HQ2, they called it. The plan was to bring 25,000 jobs to Long Island City in Queens, your district. Do you remember this? Of course I remember. And what was the average salary for these jobs? They claimed, not what they claimed, what the actual plan stated. What was the average salary? AOC hesitated. Around 150,000. 150,000. Patel repeated, for 25,000 jobs, that's, let me do the math here, $3.75 billion in annual wages in your district for your constituents. Is my math correct? The deal was corporate welfare. That's not what I asked. Is my math correct? Yes. And Amazon was going to receive approximately $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. Correct? Yes. Which is tax incentives, not cash. Not a check. Tax incentives, meaning they would pay less in taxes on their profits, but they'd still be paying taxes. They'd still be creating 25,000 jobs. They'd still be generating economic activity. Correct. It was a giveaway to just answer the question, please. Would they still be creating jobs and paying taxes? Yes, but thank you. Patel pulled out a document. Now, the total economic impact study estimated that Amazon would generate approximately $27 billion in tax revenue over 25 years. $27 billion in exchange for $3 billion in incentives. That's a 9-to-1 return on investment. Were you aware of those numbers? AOC shifted in her seat. Those projections were inflated. Were they? The same consulting firm that did Amazon's projections also did the projections for Microsoft, Google, and Apple expansions that all met or exceeded expectations. But you knew better. I represented the concerns of my community. Did you? Patel's voice sharpened. Because after Amazon pulled out of New York after you celebrated killing the deal, I have some quotes here I'd like to read. He picked up a printout of tweets. This is from your Twitter account, November 2019. You wrote, and I quote, "Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world." End quote. Is that accurate? Yes, I said that. You celebrated killing 25,000 jobs. They weren't good jobs. They paid $150,000 a year. Patel's voice rose for the first time. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, the median household income in your district is $54,000. You killed jobs that paid nearly triple what your constituents earn, and you celebrated it. AOC's face reddened. It was about more than jobs, was it? Because I have another quote here. You said, again on Twitter, we were subsidizing it. We could invest that $3 billion elsewhere. Do you remember saying that? Yes, so you thought the $3 billion in tax incentives was actual money. Money that could be spent elsewhere. Is that correct? AOC hesitated, sensing the trap. The principal, do you understand how tax incentives work, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Of course I do. Then explain it. Explain how New York was going to spend $3 billion in tax incentives if Amazon never came. Silence. You can't, can you? Because tax incentives aren't money sitting in a vault. They're reductions in future tax obligations. If Amazon doesn't come, if those jobs aren't created, if that economic activity doesn't happen, there's no $3 billion. There's nothing. Patel pulled out another document. In fact, after Amazon left, did New York invest $3 billion in Long Island City? That's not a fair yes or no. Did it happen? No, because the money didn't exist. The tax base didn't exist. The jobs didn't exist. You killed the deal and your constituents got nothing. He leaned forward. But let's talk about what they did lose, because 25,000 jobs at 150,000, that's $3.75 billion in annual wages, as we established. Over 10 years, that's $37.5 billion in wages that your constituents will never see because you didn't understand basic economics. AOC tried to interrupt. The community didn't want, didn't they? Patel pulled out a poll. This is from a Quinnipiac poll conducted after Amazon pulled out. 57% of New York City voters said Amazon should come to New York. 56% of your own constituents supported the deal. You didn't represent your community. You represented your ideology. He wasn't finished. And here's the most interesting part. You opposed Amazon getting tax incentives. You called it corporate welfare. But let's talk about your Green New Deal. AOC perked up slightly. The Green New Deal is about, I've read it, all 14 pages. And do you know what it proposes? Massive government investment in private companies, subsidies for renewable energy corporations, tax incentives for electric vehicle manufacturers, government contracts for infrastructure companies. Patel spread out a series of documents. Tesla would get billions. General Electric would get billions. Google would get billions for smart grid technology. All paid for by taxpayers, all government picking winners and losers. That's the exact same thing as the Amazon deal, except on a much, much larger scale. He looked directly at her. So Amazon getting $3 billion in tax incentives to create 25,000 jobs is corporate welfare, but Tesla and Google getting tens of billions for your Green New Deal is what? Progressive. AOC's jaw clenched. That's different. How? Explain to me how it's different. Because the Green New Deal is about saving the planet and Amazon was about creating jobs. Both are policy goals. Both involve government incentives for corporations. The only difference is you liked one and not the other. Patel pulled out another document. Speaking of the Green New Deal and climate policy, let's talk about your own carbon footprint. AOC's eyes widened slightly. According to your campaign finance records, during your 2018 campaign, you spent approximately $29,000 on Uber and Lyft rides. Is that correct? I was traveling constantly. You spent $29,000 on ride-sharing services. How much did you spend on subway rides and public transportation? Silence. I'll help you. According to the same filings, you spent approximately $8,000 on public transportation. So you spent more than 3 times as much on private car services as you did on the subway. He looked up at her. Isn't the subway more environmentally friendly than cars? Yes, but isn't public transportation one of the solutions you advocate for in the Green New Deal? Yes. So you want working families to take the bus and subway, which you call essential climate solutions, but you personally spend 3 times as much on private car services. AOC's lawyer leaned in, whispered urgently. She shook her head at him. Director Patel, this is ridiculous. I was running for Congress. I had to get to events. I understand, you were busy. You had places to be. Taking the subway takes longer, it's less convenient. Sometimes you're carrying materials. Sometimes you're tired. Patel paused. But don't working families have the same problem? Don't they have places to be? Aren't they tired after a long day? Don't they sometimes need to carry things? He leaned forward. The difference is you expect them to sacrifice for the climate, to take slower transportation, to pay higher energy costs, to give up gas cars. But when it's your convenience on the line, suddenly those sacrifices aren't so appealing. AOC started to respond, but Patel held up a hand. One more thing on this. You drive a Tesla, correct? She hesitated. Yes. A Tesla Model 3. Yes. Starting price around $42,000. The average new car in America costs about $28,000. Your car costs 50% more than what most Americans can afford. But you want to ban gas cars, which are cheaper, and force working families to buy electric vehicles they can't afford. He set the documents down. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I'm starting to see a pattern. You advocate for policies that sound progressive, that claim to help working people. But when it comes to your own life, Met Galas, designer dresses, Teslas, private car services, you live very differently than the people you claim to represent. That's not fair, isn't it? Patel gathered the Amazon and Green New Deal documents. You killed 25,000 jobs paying 150,000 because you didn't understand economics. You advocate for climate policies you don't personally follow. You attend elite parties while lecturing about inequality. He pulled out a new folder. But let's talk about January 6th, since you brought it up in your opening statement. The room tensed immediately. AOC sat up straighter. I stand by everything I said about that day. I'm sure you do. Let's review it. Patel opened the folder. Inside was a map of the Capitol complex. He set it on the table where the cameras could see it. This is the U.S. Capitol complex. The main Capitol building is here. The dome, the House chamber, the Senate chamber. Is that correct? Yes. And these buildings surrounding it. Cannon, Longworth, Rayburn on the House side, Russell, Dirksen, Hart on the Senate side. These are the office buildings where members of Congress have their offices. Correct. And your office is in the Cannon House office building. Is that right? AOC hesitated. She knew where this was going. Yes. The Cannon building is approximately 2 blocks from the Capitol building. It's connected by underground tunnels, but it's a separate building. Correct. It's part of the Capitol complex. It's a separate building. Yes or no? Yes. On January 6, 2021, where were you when the Capitol building was breached? I was in my office. In the Cannon building. Yes, but. So you were not in the Capitol building when rioters broke in. AOC's voice rose. The entire complex was under threat. I didn't ask about threats. I asked about location. Were you in the Capitol building, the building that was breached on January 6th? No, but thank you. Patel pulled out a transcript. Now, in an Instagram live video you posted on February 1st, 2021, you described your experience that day. You said, and I'm reading your exact words, I thought I was going to die. I did think that. You said you had a very close encounter where you thought you would be killed. You described hiding in a bathroom. You said a man entered your office banging on doors and shouting, "Where is she?" Is that all accurate? Yes. And you said this man was looking at you with a tremendous amount of anger and hostility, that he didn't identify himself, that you didn't know who he was. Correct. That's what happened. And later in that video, you revealed this man was a Capitol police officer. Is that correct? Yes, but I didn't know that at the time. We'll get to that. Patel pulled out another document. This is a sworn statement from Capitol Police Officer Michael Rodriguez. He was the officer who came to your office on January 6th. Would you like to hear what he says happened? AOC's lawyer stood up. Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. Grassley banged the gavel. Director Patel is entitled to question the witness. She made serious allegations in her opening statement. He's entitled to examine those allegations. Sit down, counselor. The lawyer sat. Patel continued. Officer Rodriguez states that he was assigned to evacuate offices in the Cannon building after suspicious packages were found outside the DNC and RNC headquarters, both within blocks of Cannon. He states that he knocked on your door and announced Capitol Police multiple times. He states that when he entered, following evacuation protocol, you were not initially visible because you were in the bathroom. When you emerged, he immediately identified himself again, with his badge clearly visible. He instructed you to evacuate to a secure location. You complied. The entire interaction lasted approximately 90 seconds. Patel looked up from the document. He says there was no anger, no hostility, no shouting, "Where is she?" He was doing his job, evacuating members of Congress during an emergency. Does his account differ from yours? AOC's hands were shaking slightly. You perceived hostility that wasn't there. You perceived a threat that didn't exist. And then you went on Instagram and told millions of people that you thought this police officer, who was there to save your life, was going to kill you. I didn't know he was police. He announced himself multiple times and he was in full uniform. But even if we accept your version that somehow you didn't hear him or see his uniform, why didn't you correct the record later? After you found out he was Capitol Police, after you knew he was there to help you, why didn't you go back on Instagram and say, I made a mistake? I was scared and confused, but the officer was actually helping me. Why didn't you do that? Silence. Because the story of the scary officer was more useful than the truth, wasn't it? AOC's voice was barely audible. That's not, you used that story to claim you were hunted, traumatized, nearly killed. You leveraged it for political points. You attacked Republicans who questioned your account. You accused them of not believing survivors. Patel's voice hardened. And in that same Instagram video, you revealed that you're a survivor of sexual assault, which is serious, which is real, and which has nothing to do with a Capitol Police officer evacuating your office during an emergency. AOC's eyes filled with tears. I was explaining my trauma response. You were using past trauma to validate a false narrative about present events. Patel's voice was sharp. And that's not just unfair to Officer Rodriguez. It's unfair to every legitimate survivor who watched you weaponize sexual assault to shield yourself from accountability. Senator Hyerno interrupted. Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous. This witness claimed she was hunted on January 6th. Patel responded before Grassley could speak. She used that claim to question FBI credibility. I'm entitled to examine whether her claim is true. He turned back to AOC. Were there rioters in the Cannon building? There were pipe bombs. Were there rioters in the building? In your hallway? Number, were there rioters anywhere near your office? The threat answered the question. Were there rioters near your office? No, so you were not hunted. You were not in immediate danger from rioters. A police officer came to evacuate you and you hid in a bathroom because you didn't recognize him. Is that the truth? AOC wiped at her eyes. I was scared. I'm sure you were. It was a scary day for everyone, but scared is not the same as hunted. Confused is not the same as endangered. And a Capitol Police officer doing his job is not the same as an insurrectionist trying to kill you. Patel pulled out a series of tweets, but you didn't just tell this story once. You repeated it. You embellished it. In interviews, you said you thought you were going to be raped. You said rioters were looking for you specifically. You compared your experience to sexual assault. He spread the printouts across the table. And when Representative Nancy Mace, whose office is 2 doors down from yours, said that no insurrectionists came into your hallway, you attacked her. You called her a liar. You accused her of enabling violence against you. You remember that. She was minimizing. She was telling the truth. There were no rioters in your hallway. You admitted that 30 seconds ago. But when she said it, you called her a liar and accused her of putting you in danger. Patel leaned back. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I want to be very clear about something. January 6th was serious. 5 people died. 140 police officers were injured. The Capitol building was breached for the first time since 1814. It was a dark day for our democracy. His voice dropped. But you weren't in that building. You weren't in danger from rioters. You were 2 blocks away, being evacuated by police who were protecting you. And instead of being grateful, instead of being honest, you turned it into a performance. You made it about you, your trauma, your fear, your near-death experience that never happened. AOC was openly crying now. Several Democratic senators looked away. And then you used that false narrative to attack anyone who questioned you. You wrapped yourself in victimhood. You made it about sexism and racism and people not believing women. But it had nothing to do with any of that. It had to do with you exaggerating what happened for political gain. Patel gathered the January 6th documents. You came here today and said you were hunted. You said the FBI did nothing to stop it. But you weren't hunted. You were never in danger from rioters. The only person who came to your office was a cop trying to save you, and you turned him into a villain in your Instagram story. He looked directly at her. So when you question the FBI's credibility, when you question whether we investigate the right people, when you question whether we can be trusted, I have to ask, can you be trusted? Can the American people trust a word you say after you lied about something this serious? The room was silent except for AOC's quiet sobbing. Grassley finally spoke. We'll take a 15-minute recess. His gavel came down. When the hearing reconvened, AOC had composed herself. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. She looked like she was preparing for war. It wasn't. Patel waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, let's talk about your lifestyle. She stiffened. My personal life is not, when you call yourself a democratic socialist who fights for working families, it is. Patel opened a new folder. You make $174,000 per year as a member of Congress. Correct. That's the congressional salary. Yes, that puts you in the top 10% of American earners. You make more than 90% of Americans. Is that fair to say? I suppose. You also have a book deal. You've sold merchandise. You give paid speeches. Your total income is significantly higher than your congressional salary. Isn't that correct? AOC's lawyer leaned in again. She waved him off. I've had some additional income, yes. According to your most recent financial disclosure, you reported between 100,000 and 1 million in assets. You're a millionaire or close to it. Is that accurate? I don't think my net worth is anyone's business. You made it everyone's business when you wore a tax the rich dress to the Met Gala. Patel's voice was sharp. You made it everyone's business when you call yourself working class. So let's examine your claim. He pulled out a photo. This is your apartment building in Washington, D.C., Navy Yard neighborhood, luxury building, doorman, rooftop terrace. Monthly rent estimated between $2,000 and $2,500. Is that where you live? I need a place to live while Congress is in session. Of course you do. I'm not criticizing that. I'm simply establishing facts. He pulled out another photo. And in New York you have an apartment in the Bronx, Parkchester neighborhood. How much is your rent there? I don't see how, because you constantly refer to yourself as working class. You talk about struggling to afford rent in D.C. You present yourself as just barely getting by, like the constituents you represent. But you make $174,000. You have 2 apartments. You attend $35,000 parties. That's not working class. That's upper middle class at minimum. AOC's face reddened. I came from a working class background, past tense. You came from one, but you're not working class anymore. You're a wealthy member of Congress who lives a comfortable, privileged life while cosplaying as a bartender who can barely make ends meet. He pulled out more photos. You drive a Tesla. You wear designer clothes. You vacation in luxury resorts. You attend exclusive events. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, except that you simultaneously lecture working families about their consumption, their carbon footprints, their privilege. Patel leaned forward. You see the hypocrisy. You live a life of relative luxury while demanding that working families, people who make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, sacrifice for your policy preferences. They should take the bus. They should pay higher energy costs. They should give up gas cars. They should pay more taxes. But you get to fly to climate conferences, drive a Tesla, and wear designer dresses to parties that cost more than they make in a year. That's a mischaracterization. Is it? Let's talk about your fiancé, Riley Roberts. AOC's eyes widened. Riley has nothing to do with O, but he does. Patel pulled out a series of forms. These are travel disclosure forms you filed with the House Ethics Committee. They're required whenever you take trips that are paid for or subsidized by outside parties. Starting in January 2023, you began listing Riley Roberts as your spouse on these forms. Is that correct? AOC hesitated. Yes, but here's the interesting thing. On these forms, there's a very specific definition of spouse. Patel read from the form. It says, and I quote, someone to whom you are legally married, not partner, not fiancé, legally married. He looked up at her. Are you legally married to Riley Roberts? That's a semantic, it's a legal definition, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. The form is very clear. Spouse means legally married. So I'll ask again, are you married to him? Her lawyer stood. Mr. Chairman, sit down. Grassley's voice was firm. The witness will answer the question. AOC looked cornered. We consider ourselves, yes or no. Are you legally married? Do you have a marriage certificate? No. Then why did you list him as your spouse on these forms? House ethics commonly recognizes long-term partners. No, they don't. Patel held up the form. Your spokesperson said that when you were called out on this, but it's not true. The House Ethics Committee definition of spouse is clear. Legally married. The Office of Congressional Ethics has a different definition that includes long-term partners, but these forms go to the House Ethics Committee, not OCE, and their definition requires legal marriage. He pulled out another document, and here's why it matters. Members of Congress are required to disclose the financial information of their spouses, income, assets, stock holdings, but they're not required to disclose that information for boyfriends, girlfriends, or fiancés. It's called the boyfriend loophole. Patel looked directly at her. So if Riley Roberts is your spouse, you need to disclose his finances. If he's not your spouse, then you filed these forms incorrectly, which could be an ethics violation. Which is it? AOC said nothing. Let me help you understand why this matters. According to his LinkedIn profile, Riley Roberts works for a company called Homebinder. He also runs a consulting company called Riley UX. But you've never disclosed his income, never disclosed his assets, never disclosed whether he owns stock in companies you vote on legislation about. Patel spread out several forms. If you're legally married, which would make your forms correct, then you're violating disclosure requirements by hiding his finances. If you're not legally married, which would make your forms false, then you committed a potential ethics violation by misrepresenting your marital status. Back. Either way, you've got a problem, and either way, you're hiding something. AOC's jaw clenched. This is a witch hunt. This is you checking a box that says spouse when you're not married. That's not a witch hunt. That's you not following the rules that apply to everyone else. Patel gathered the forms, but let's talk about the broader pattern here. The Met Gala, you accepted tens of thousands in gifts and only paid after getting caught. Amazon, you killed jobs because you didn't understand economics. January 6th, you exaggerated what happened for political gain. And now we find out you've potentially misrepresented your marital status to avoid financial disclosure. He looked at the senators. At what point does this stop being innocent mistakes and start being a pattern of someone who believes the rules don't apply to her? Senator Kennedy spoke up. Director Patel, I think you've made your point. Do you have additional questions for the witness? Just one more area, Senator. Patel pulled out a final folder. I'd like to discuss Representative Ocasio-Cortez's actual legislative record. AOC sat up straighter. Maybe this was safer ground. It wasn't. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you've been in Congress since January 2019. That's almost 7 years. How many bills that you sponsored have been signed into law? She hesitated. Legislative success isn't measured solely by just give me a number. 0, 0. Patel repeated. In 7 years, you haven't passed a single bill. Is that correct? The legislative process is complicated. Other members of your freshman class passed bills. Abigail Spanberger passed legislation on insider trading. Alyssa Slotkin passed defense legislation. Katie Porter passed financial reform legislation. They were elected the same time as you, but they passed laws. You didn't. Why is that? I focus on transformative policy like the Green New Deal. Patel pulled out a document. Let's talk about that. You introduced it with great fanfare in February 2019. Press conferences. Media coverage. You called it the most important legislation of our generation. And when it came up for a vote in the Senate, what happened? AOC said nothing. It failed. 0 votes in favor, 57 against. Not even your Democratic colleagues voted for it. Why? Republicans sabotaged, Democrats controlled the Senate. Your own party voted against it. Why? Because it was too bold or because it was completely unrealistic. Patel opened the document. Let's review what the Green New Deal actually proposed. Eliminate all fossil fuels within 10 years. Retrofit every building in America. Guarantee jobs for everyone, including people unwilling to work. Ban air travel. Get rid of cows, all within a decade. He looked up at her. The estimated cost was $93 trillion over 10 years. That's 6 times the entire U.S. GDP. Did you have a plan to pay for that? Modern monetary theory says modern monetary theory is not accepted by mainstream economists. Even liberal economists said your plan was economically illiterate. Paul Krugman, a progressive, called it unworkable. So did Larry Summers. So did Jason Furman, who was Obama's top economic advisor. Patel leaned forward. You proposed legislation that had no chance of passing, no realistic funding mechanism, and no support from serious economists. But it got you tremendous attention. Thousands of media appearances, millions of social media followers, a national profile. He paused, almost like that was the point. Not to pass legislation, not to help people, but to raise your profile. AOC's voice rose. I'm fighting for transformative change. You're performing for cameras. Patel's voice matched hers. You introduce bills you know won't pass. You give speeches that go viral. You pick fights on Twitter. You show up at protests with photographers. Everything you do is designed for maximum media attention and minimum actual results. He pulled out more documents. The concentration camp's comment about border facilities. The crying photo op at the chain-link fence, which we later found out was in an empty parking lot. The dramatic present vote on Iron Dome funding where you sobbed on the House floor. The Instagram videos where you cook in your kitchen and talk about policy. It's all performance. AOC was on her feet again. I connect with my constituents. You connect with your followers. There's a difference. Your constituents, the people who actually live in your district, they need jobs. They need safe neighborhoods. They need good schools. What have you delivered for them? I've fought for you, fought in committee hearings that make good clips. You fought on Twitter, but what have you actually done? What legislation have you passed? What funding have you secured? What problems have you solved? Silence. You killed 25,000 Amazon jobs, that's what you did. That's your legacy in your district. Prevented jobs, prevented investment, prevented opportunity. Patel gathered his documents. But let's talk about what happened to you politically because it's revealing. When you first ran for Congress in 2018, you positioned yourself as an insurgent, a progressive who would primary establishment Democrats. You primaried Joe Crowley, the fourth-ranking Democrat in the House. You beat him. You said the Democratic Party needed to move left, needed new blood, needed people willing to challenge incumbents who weren't progressive enough. He pulled out recent news articles. But now you're telling progressives not to primary Hakeem Jeffries. You're defending the establishment. You're saying primary challenges are bad. What changed? AOC's eyes narrowed. That's different. How? How is it different? You primaried Crowley when he was headed toward leadership. Now Ocasio wants to primary Jeffries, who is leadership, and you say it's wrong. The only difference is that now you're part of the establishment you used to attack. Patel leaned back in his chair. You've become exactly what you ran against. A politician more concerned with protecting your position than with principles. Someone who advocates for rules that don't apply to you. Someone who demands sacrifices from others that you won't make yourself. He looked at the senators. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez came here today to question the FBI's credibility, to question whether we investigate the right people, to question whether we can be trusted to fairly enforce the law. His voice was hard, but everything we've discussed today shows that she is the one with credibility problems. She is the one who doesn't follow the rules. She is the one who performs instead of produces. He turned back to AOC. You accepted illegal gifts. You killed jobs because you didn't understand economics. You exaggerated January 6th for attention. You live a privileged life while lecturing working families. You potentially violated ethics rules on financial disclosure. And in 7 years, you've passed 0 laws. Patel gathered all his folders. You're not a legislator. You're an influencer who happens to have a congressional seat. You're not helping your constituents. You're building your brand. You're not fighting for change. You're performing for cameras. He looked at Chairman Grassley. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions, but I do have a recommendation. Grassley nodded. Proceed. Based on today's testimony, I recommend that the House Ethics Committee reopen its investigation into Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial disclosures, specifically regarding her marital status and failure to disclose her partner's finances. I further recommend that the committee examine whether her delayed payments for Met Gala expenses constitute an ongoing ethics violation. He paused. And Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. The FBI has never investigated Representative Ocasio-Cortez. We have no open cases involving her. We have not questioned her staff or subpoenaed her donors. Every allegation she made in her opening statement about FBI targeting was false. Patel looked directly at AOC one last time. But maybe we should have been investigating, because based on what we've learned today, there's a pattern of behavior that warrants scrutiny. Accepting gifts, violating ethics rules, making false statements about January 6th, potentially filing false disclosure forms. His voice was cold. You came here to attack the FBI's credibility. You should have worried about your own. He closed his folders. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. The hearing room erupted. Reporters sprinted for the exits. Democratic senators huddled together, whispering urgently. Republican senators looked vindicated. AOC sat frozen in the witness chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. Her chief of staff approached and whispered in her ear. She shook her head. He whispered again, more urgently. Finally she stood. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a closing statement. The witness's time has expired. Grassley's voice was firm. This hearing is adjourned. His gavel came down. AOC started to protest, but her lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. Cameras followed her every step. Reporters shouted questions. Representative, did you lie about January 6th? Are you married to Riley Roberts? Will you pay back the Met Gala money? Do you regret killing the Amazon deal? She said nothing. Her head was down. Her signature confidence had evaporated. As she reached the door, one reporter's voice cut through the chaos. What happened to tax the rich, AOC? She kept walking. Behind her, Kash Patel calmly packed his documents into his briefcase. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Senator Kennedy caught his eye and nodded appreciatively. The FBI director nodded back. Some days, he thought, justice was simply a matter of asking the right questions and letting the answers speak for themselves. The C-SPAN clip hit 10 million views in 6 hours. By the end of the first day, it had been viewed 85 million times across all platforms. The most shared moment, Patel asking, "Were there rioters in your hallway?" followed by AOC's barely audible "No." The second most shared, "How many bills have you passed?" 0. The progressive media tried to frame it as an attack on a woman of color. MSNBC ran segments on weaponizing congressional hearings. The Young Turks called it character assassination. But even liberal commentators couldn't defend her. "Look, I'm progressive," said one CNN analyst, but she got destroyed. There's no other way to say it. She came in hot, made allegations she couldn't back up, and got systematically dismantled. The New York Times ran an editorial, AOC's credibility crisis. The Washington Post fact-checked her claims about FBI targeting, 0 evidence. Even The Atlantic, usually sympathetic to progressive politicians, published a devastating piece. The Performance Artist in Congress: How Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Mastered Media Without Mastering Legislation. Within 48 hours, 3 things happened. First, the House Ethics Committee announced it was reopening its investigation into AOC's financial disclosures, specifically the spouse-partner question and her Met Gala payments. Second, a primary challenger emerged. Her name was Maria Santos, a Bronx native, Iraq War veteran, former NYPD officer, and unlike AOC, she actually lived paycheck to paycheck. Her announcement video opened with footage of AOC at the Met Gala, then cut to Maria in her modest apartment. "While she was wearing designer dresses at exclusive parties, I was working double shifts to pay my rent. While she killed 25,000 jobs, I was trying to create opportunities for our community. While she performed for Instagram, I was serving our country and protecting our streets." The Bronx deserves better than a social media influencer with a congressional seat. The video went viral immediately. Third, AOC's approval rating in her district dropped 17 points in 1 week. A poll showed her losing to Maria Santos by 8 points in a hypothetical primary. For the first time since her meteoric rise in 2018, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez looked vulnerable. Actually vulnerable. Not the performative vulnerability she displayed in Instagram videos, but the real kind. The kind that comes when voters finally see through the performance. She tried to recover. She released a statement. "Today's hearing was a coordinated attack by far-right extremists who are threatened by a woman of color speaking truth to power." But the statement rang hollow. Kash Patel wasn't far-right. He was a Trump appointee, yes, but his questions weren't about ideology. They were about facts, documents, her own words, and she couldn't refute any of it. She tried rallying her base on social media. She tweeted about misogyny and racism, and how the powerful always attack those who threaten the status quo. But the replies were brutal, even from progressives. "You lied about January 6th, wrote one verified progressive activist. "I defended you, I attacked Nancy Mace for you, and you lied, I'm done." Another, "I donated to your campaigns, I bought your merch, I believed in you, but you can't even answer basic questions about your own ethics violations. This isn't about being a woman of color, this is about accountability. The squad tried to defend her. Ilhan Omar tweeted support. Rashida Tlaib called the hearing a witch hunt. But their defenses were perfunctory, obligatory. Even they seemed uncomfortable. Behind the scenes, Democratic leadership was furious. Not at Patel, at AOC. She had walked into a Senate hearing, made explosive allegations she couldn't support, and handed Republicans the greatest political gift imaginable. She made us all look like idiots, one senior Democratic senator told Politico, speaking on condition of anonymity. We've been defending her for years, defending her Green New Deal, defending her January 6th story, defending her against ethics complaints, and it turns out she's been lying about all of it. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, released a carefully worded statement. All members of Congress must uphold the highest ethical standards and be truthful in their public statements. It was the political equivalent of throwing her overboard. Nancy Pelosi said nothing publicly, but sources close to her told reporters she was privately livid. AOC had embarrassed the Democratic Party on national television, and during an election year no less. The progressive movement itself began to fracture. Some remained loyal to AOC, insisting she was the victim of a smear campaign. But others, particularly those focused on actual policy rather than performance, began to distance themselves. We need legislators, not celebrities, wrote a prominent progressive blogger. We need people who pass laws, not people who go viral. AOC has spent 7 years building a brand instead of building coalitions. 7 years getting attention instead of getting results. That's not progressive leadership. That's narcissism wrapped in socialist rhetoric. The criticism cut deeper because it came from the left. AOC had always been able to dismiss conservative criticism. But when progressives started questioning her, when they started asking what she'd actually accomplished, the facade began to crumble. Her staff was in chaos. 3 senior staffers resigned within a week of the hearing. One, her former legislative director, gave an anonymous interview to the Washington Post. She doesn't care about legislation, the staffer said. She cares about her Instagram followers. We'd spend days crafting policy proposals, and she'd spend 5 minutes on them before moving on to plan her next viral moment. It was exhausting. We weren't there to serve constituents. We were there to serve her personal brand. The revelations kept coming. A former aide to Joe Crowley, the congressman AOC had primaried, revealed that AOC's campaign had initially approached Crowley about endorsing her for city council, not Congress. Only after he declined did she decide to primary him. The insurgent narrative, the David versus Goliath story that launched her career, had been manufactured. Another former staffer disclosed that AOC's famous, "I can't afford an apartment in D.C." story was exaggerated. She had a trust fund from her late father. Not a massive one, but enough to cover first month's rent and security deposit. The struggling bartender narrative was, like so much else, performance. Amazon controversy reignited. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who had negotiated the Amazon deal, gave a blistering interview. She cost New York 25,000 jobs because she wanted to be famous. She didn't understand basic economics. She thought $3 billion in tax incentives was actual money sitting in a vault. And when we tried to explain it to her, she didn't want to hear it. She'd already decided Amazon was the enemy because that played well with her base. He paused. You know what the saddest part is? Those jobs would have gone to working families, construction workers, tech workers, service workers, the exact people she claims to represent, but she sacrificed them for applause from Twitter activists who don't even live in New York. Union leaders in her district, many of whom had supported the Amazon deal, began speaking out. We begged her to reconsider, said one. We explained how many union jobs this would create. She didn't care. She said it was about principles. But you can't eat principles. You can't pay rent with principles. Our members needed those jobs. The January 6th controversy was perhaps the most damaging. Officer Rodriguez, the Capitol Police officer who had evacuated AOC, gave his first public interview. He was soft-spoken, measured. He didn't attack her. He simply told the truth. I was doing my job, he said. There were suspicious packages near the Capitol complex. We were evacuating everyone we could find. I knocked. I announced myself. I showed my badge. I instructed Representative Ocasio-Cortez to evacuate, and she did. It was a standard evacuation, nothing unusual, nothing threatening. When asked about AOC's claim that he was angry and hostile, he paused. I was concerned. It was an emergency, but hostile. No, I was there to help her. I was there to protect her. He looked directly at the camera. I've been a Capitol Police officer for 15 years. I've evacuated members of Congress dozens of times during emergencies. This was routine, and to have it characterized as something traumatic, something violent, something that made her fear for her life, it's not true. And it's not fair to the officers who actually were in the Capitol building that day, fighting rioters, getting injured, protecting democracy. His voice cracked slightly. I have colleagues who have PTSD from January 6th, real PTSD. They were beaten. They were sprayed with chemicals. They were crushed in doorways. One of my friends lost an eye. Another has permanent brain damage. And Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who was 2 blocks away being safely evacuated, is comparing her experience to theirs, is claiming she was hunted. It's an insult to them. The interview had 20 million views in 24 hours. Even AOC's most loyal supporters couldn't defend it. How do you defend someone who appropriated the trauma of people who actually suffered? Nancy Mace, the Republican representative AOC had called a liar, held a press conference. She was calm, factual. My office is 2 doors down from Representative Ocasio-Cortez. On January 6th, I was also in the Cannon building. I was also evacuated by Capitol Police, and I can confirm definitively that no rioters came into our hallway, not one. Representative Ocasio-Cortez and I had the same experience that day. We were scared. We were evacuated. But we were not hunted. We were not in the Capitol building. We were not in danger from rioters. She paused. The difference is I told the truth about what happened and she lied. And when I tried to correct the record, she attacked me. She accused me of enabling violence against her. She made it about my sexual assault history, trying to suggest I was less of a survivor because I didn't agree with her narrative. Mace's voice hardened. I am a rape survivor. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I will not be lectured about trauma by someone who weaponized trauma for political gain. What Representative Ocasio-Cortez did, using sexual assault to validate a false story about January 6th, is disgusting. It's an insult to every real survivor. The press conference was devastating. Mace wasn't screaming. She wasn't performing. She was simply telling the truth. And the contrast with AOC's theatrics couldn't have been clearer. The Met Gala became a cultural flashpoint. Late-night comedians who had once celebrated AOC turned on her. So let me get this straight, said one. She wore a tax-the-rich dress to a party that costs more than most Americans make in a year, and she didn't even pay for the dress. That's not making a statement. That's freeloading with extra steps. Another. AOC says she was infiltrating spaces of wealth. Lady, when you're posing for Vogue in a designer gown at the Met Gala, you're not infiltrating. You're participating. The jokes were merciless because they were accurate. Saturday Night Live did a sketch where an actress playing AOC kept saying, "I'm just like you," while attending increasingly lavish events. The final scene showed her at a yacht party, champagne in hand, telling struggling workers to eat less meat for the climate. The audience roared. Even mainstream Democrats began to see AOC as a liability. She had been useful when she was attacking Republicans, when she was energizing young voters. But now she was a walking ethics violation, a hypocrite, a performer who couldn't legislate. Worse, she was a symbol of everything voters hated about politicians. Someone who said one thing and did another, someone who lived by different rules, someone who cared more about fame than service. The primary challenge from Maria Santos gained momentum. Santos raised $1 million in her first week, much of it from small donors in the district. Her message was simple: real service, real results, real representation. She campaigned in neighborhoods AOC rarely visited. She held town halls, not Instagram live sessions. She talked about specific legislation she would introduce, specific funding she would fight for, specific problems she would solve. She was everything AOC wasn't: substantive, honest, focused on governance rather than performance. The contrast was stark. AOC's response was to double down on victimhood. She claimed the entire system was arrayed against her. The FBI, the media, the Democratic establishment, Republican operatives, even other progressives who criticized her were labeled sellouts or useful idiots. But voters in her district were tired of the excuses. They were tired of the drama. They were tired of having a representative who was famous but ineffective, who had a national profile but couldn't fix potholes in the Bronx, who could get millions of Instagram likes but couldn't get a bill passed. The polls continued to deteriorate. By 3 weeks after the hearing, Santos led AOC by 12 points. Democratic Party strategists began wargaming the scenario. If AOC lost her primary, what would that mean for the progressive movement, for the squad, for the party's relationship with young voters? Some argued they should support AOC, protect their incumbent. Others argued they should stay neutral, let the voters decide. A smaller faction argued they should actively support Santos, cut their losses, replace a dysfunctional member with a competent one. Behind closed doors, the decision was made. The party would stay neutral publicly but quietly support Santos. Donor networks were activated. Endorsements were secured. The message was sent. AOC had become a problem, and problems needed to be solved. AOC sensed what was happening. She felt the walls closing in. For 7 years, she had been untouchable, the progressive darling, the future of the Democratic Party, the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. But now she was damaged goods, tainted, vulnerable. She tried to schedule meetings with Democratic leaders. They were all busy. She reached out to progressive organizations that had once championed her. They offered tepid support or none at all. She called media allies, hoping for favorable coverage. They wrote pieces, but even friendly journalists couldn't ignore the facts Patel had laid out. Everything came back to that hearing. Those documents, those questions, those answers. The truth had a way of cutting through narrative, and the truth about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was that she was a fraud. Not in the sense that she didn't believe in progressive policies, she probably did, but in the sense that she cared more about being famous for supporting those policies than actually implementing them. She cared more about the performance of activism than the work of legislation. She cared more about her brand than her constituents. Voters, even progressive voters, eventually figure that out. Kash Patel, meanwhile, became a folk hero on the right and a grudgingly respected figure on the left. Conservatives praised his takedown of AOC, but even liberals had to admit he'd done his homework. He'd been fair. He'd used her own words, her own actions, her own ethics violations. He hadn't needed to distort or exaggerate. The facts were damning enough. That's how you conduct oversight, wrote one center-left columnist. Not partisan theatrics, not wild accusations, just thorough preparation and pointed questions. Patel didn't destroy AOC. She destroyed herself. He just held up the mirror. The FBI director gave a speech at the National Press Club 2 weeks after the hearing. He didn't mention AOC by name, but everyone knew what he was talking about. There's a difference, he said, between accountability and persecution. Accountability is asking someone to defend their actions, to explain their decisions, to live by the same rules they demand others follow. Persecution is attacking someone for who they are, not what they've done. He paused. When public officials make serious allegations about law enforcement, when they question the integrity of institutions, when they claim to be victims of targeting or harassment, those allegations must be examined. Because if they're true, we need to fix the problem. And if they're false, we need to know that too. The audience, a mix of journalists and political figures, was silent. Representative Ocasio-Cortez claimed the FBI investigated her. We didn't. She claimed we questioned her staff. We didn't. She claimed we subpoenaed her donors. We didn't. Every allegation was false. His voice hardened. But in questioning her allegations, we discovered real ethics violations, real hypocrisy, real dishonesty, not about politics, about behavior, about character, about whether she lives by the principles she espouses. He looked directly at the cameras. That's not targeting, that's accountability. And every elected official, regardless of party, regardless of ideology, should be held to that standard. The speech was praised by government ethics organizations, by transparency advocates, by editorial boards across the political spectrum. Patel had articulated something important, the difference between partisan attacks and legitimate oversight. AOC had conflated the two. assuming any criticism of her was an attack on her identity. But as Patel demonstrated, you could question someone's actions without questioning their right to serve. You could examine their ethics without impugning their motives. You could hold them accountable without persecuting them. As the weeks passed, AOC's situation grew more desperate. More staffers left. More donors abandoned her. More endorsements went to Santos. She tried pivoting to policy, releasing detailed proposals on housing and healthcare, but nobody cared. The narrative was set. She was a hypocrite who couldn't legislate. Her legislative proposals, however detailed, couldn't overcome 7 years of performance and 0 bills passed. She tried attacking Santos, questioning her progressive credentials. But Santos was immune. She didn't claim to be a democratic socialist. She claimed to be a Democrat who would fight for the district. She didn't promise a revolution. She promised competence. The contrast was everything. 1 month after the hearing, a second primary challenger emerged. This one from the left. A Democratic Socialist of America member who argued that AOC had sold out, had become part of the establishment she once opposed, had abandoned real progressive principles. Now AOC was being flanked on both sides. The center thought she was too radical and incompetent. The left thought she was too compromised and ineffective. She was trapped. The press began writing political obituaries. The rise and fall of AOC, read one New York Magazine cover story. It traced her meteoric ascent from bartender to congresswoman, her viral moments, her media savvy, her celebrity. And then it documented her collapse, the ethics violations, the Amazon disaster, the January 6th lies, the legislative failures, the Kash Patel hearing. She was supposed to be the future of the Democratic Party, the article concluded. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about confusing fame with effectiveness, performance with governance, brand building with public service. Inside AOC's campaign office, the mood was funereal. Staff members who remained were exhausted, demoralized. They watched poll numbers decline week after week. They read brutal press coverage daily. They tried to spin, to reframe, to find a message that would resonate. Nothing worked. The candidate herself oscillated between defiance and despair. Some days she was convinced she could still win, that her grassroots support would carry her through. Other days she talked about life after Congress, about what she would do next, about how the system had failed her. But it wasn't the system that had failed her. She had failed herself by choosing performance over substance, by prioritizing fame over effectiveness, by believing her own mythology, by thinking the rules didn't apply to her. Maria Santos, meanwhile, was running a textbook campaign, door-knocking, town halls, community meetings. She met with local business owners, neighborhood associations, union leaders, clergy members. She listened more than she talked. She asked what people needed and how she could help. She didn't promise revolution. She promised representation. And voters responded. The polls showed Santos pulling further ahead, 15 points, then 18, then 20. It wasn't close anymore, it was a rout. 3 months after the Kash Patel hearing, on a warm June evening, the Bronx and Queens went to the polls for the Democratic primary. AOC voted early at her local elementary school, surrounded by cameras. She smiled. She waved. But her eyes betrayed her. She knew what was coming. The results came in quickly. By 8 p.m., with only 30% of precincts reporting, every network called the race for Maria Santos. By 9 p.m., Santos was ahead by 25 points. By 10 p.m., AOC had lost, decisively, humiliatingly, completely. She didn't give a concession speech. Her campaign released a brief statement. While tonight didn't go as we hoped, the fight for progressive values continues. I'm proud of the movement we've built and the conversations we've started. Thank you to everyone who supported our campaign. It was generic, perfunctory, devoid of the fire that had once defined her. Maria Santos's victory speech, by contrast, was everything a concession speech wasn't: forward-looking, specific, substantive. Tonight, the people of the 14th District sent a clear message. They want representation, not performance. They want results, not rhetoric. They want someone who will fight for them in Congress, not someone who fights for clicks on Instagram. The crowd erupted. Santos waited for them to quiet. I promise you this: I will work every day to earn your trust. I will focus on legislation, not celebrity. I will prioritize our community, not my profile. I will be your representative, not an influencer who happens to have a congressional seat. More cheers. The message was clear, and it was as much about what Santos would do as what AOC had failed to do. The progressive movement reacted with mixed emotions. Some mourned AOC's defeat as a loss for the left. Others celebrated it as a necessary correction, a moment when the movement chose substance over style. "We need to learn from this," wrote one prominent progressive activist. AOC showed us the power of social media, of viral moments, of speaking truth to power. But she also showed us the limits of that approach. You can't govern via Instagram. You can't legislate via Twitter. At some point, you have to do the work. The squad was diminished. AOC had been its most famous member, its voice, its face. Without her, the squad seemed smaller, less relevant. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib remained, but they were controversial for different reasons and couldn't command the same attention. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party began to reevaluate. Maybe they needed fewer activists and more legislators, fewer performers and more professionals, fewer viral moments and more passed bills. Kash Patel, asked about AOC's defeat in a later interview, was diplomatic. "I didn't set out to end anyone's career," he said. "I set out to answer serious allegations about the FBI. In doing so, we examined Representative Ocasio-Cortez's record. The voters of her district drew their own conclusions." He paused. Democracy worked. An elected official was held accountable. That's how it's supposed to work. AOC disappeared from public view after her defeat. No Instagram lives, no Twitter threads, no media appearances. For someone who had lived her life in the spotlight, the silence was deafening. Rumors circulated about what she would do next. Some said she was writing a book. Others said she was being courted by cable news networks. A few insisted she would run again, that this was just a setback. But those who knew her best understood the truth. She was broken. The hearing had exposed her. The election had rejected her. The movement had moved on without her. She had spent 7 years building a brand, and in one day Kash Patel had demolished it. Not with attacks, not with lies, but with questions, with documents, with her own words used against her. In the end, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's story was a modern fable about the difference between fame and achievement, between performance and governance, between talking about change and actually creating it. She had mastered social media but not legislation. She had built a brand but not a legacy. She had become famous but not effective. And when the spotlight finally turned to examine what she'd actually done, rather than what she'd said or posted or performed, there was nothing there. Just a former bartender who'd gotten elected to Congress, spent 7 years seeking attention, passed 0 laws, and lost her seat to someone who understood that representation required more than retweets. The 14th District of New York moved on. Maria Santos was sworn in the following January. She got to work immediately, joining committees, building relationships, drafting legislation. Within her first year, she passed 3 bills. Small ones, modest ones, but they addressed real problems her constituents faced: housing assistance, small business support, infrastructure funding. They weren't revolutionary. They weren't sexy. They didn't go viral, but they helped people. They improved lives. They governed. And in a hearing room on the other side of the Capitol, Kash Patel continued his work as FBI director. He investigated threats. He protected Americans. He held people accountable regardless of party or popularity. He didn't seek attention. He sought justice. One evening, months after AOC's defeat, a reporter asked him if he had any regrets about the hearing. Patel thought for a moment. "Only one," he said. "I wish it hadn't been necessary. I wish Representative Ocasio-Cortez had simply told the truth in the first place. Would have saved everyone a lot of time." He closed his briefcase. But when people lie under oath, when they make false allegations about law enforcement, when they abuse their positions, someone has to ask the hard questions. That day it was me. Tomorrow it might be someone else, but the questions have to be asked. The truth has to be told. That's not political. That's just right. He walked away, leaving the reporter with that thought. And in that moment, Kash Patel embodied something increasingly rare in American politics. Someone more interested in truth than narrative, more committed to duty than fame, more focused on right than popular. If AOC's story was a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing performance over substance, Patel's was an instructional manual on the power of preparation, persistence, and principle. Two people, two approaches, two very different outcomes. One sought the spotlight and lost everything when it finally revealed who she really was. The other avoided the spotlight, did his job, and let the work speak for itself. In the end, the work always speaks loudest. The truth always cuts deepest. And accountability always wins. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but eventually, inevitably, certainly. That was the lesson of the Kash Patel hearing. That was the lesson of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's fall. And that was the lesson every politician, every public official, every person in power should remember. You can perform for a while. You can deflect and distract and deceive. But eventually, someone will ask the questions you can't answer. Eventually, someone will present the documents you can't refute. Eventually, someone will hold up the mirror you can't avoid. And when that day comes, the only thing that matters is whether you've lived by the principles you've espoused, followed the rules you've demanded others follow, and told the truth you've claimed to champion. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez failed that test, spectacularly, publicly, permanently. Her career, which had begun with so much promise, ended with so much disappointment, not because she was targeted, not because she was persecuted, but because when someone finally examined her record, when someone finally asked her to defend her actions, when someone finally held her accountable, there was no defense. Just excuses, just deflection, just silence. And in the merciless arithmetic of democratic politics, that silence was her answer. That silence was her legacy. That silence was her end.